I'd like to do today, I'm in this series called Being Change, and it just kind of works out that today's story, Zsa, stealing my seat, well that's fine. So good to see you, all right. Tree, if you want to pull up my one slide for today, I'm actually going to talk through Daniel chapter 2. I'm not going to read it for you, but I'm going to tell you the story because there are a lot of things in this story that spoke a lot to me about today and what today represents, and it translates well into our lives, period. And so this is the story in Daniel chapter 2. We looked at Daniel 1, which kind of set the stage, and just kind of hold in mind that the historicity of Daniel, hold it lightly, and that's okay to do. Because wherever that was, there was also a lot of folklore that was deeply meaningful to the Jewish people, particularly the first 6 chapters of Daniel. And the story circulated to give the Jewish people great hope as they were oppressed by one regime after another over hundreds and hundreds of years. And finally, these stories were gathered together in one organized body about 100-ish, 150 years before Jesus was born. And so we see the flavor of that touching the story in there. And today is one of those that gave the people great hope. And the story is this: Nebuchadnezzar, who is this megalomaniac, he had this dream that he couldn't shake. Back in those days, in that particular part of the world, there was a belief that evil spirits of types would torment people with these horrible dreams. So Nebuchadnezzar had one of these horrible dreams, really a nightmare for him. And so he called all of his magicians and seers and spiritual people together and said, I'm having this terrible dream, you got to interpret it for me. And so they kind of with one accord say, okay, cool, we'll take a shot at it. What's the dream? And Nebuchadnezzar said, I'm not telling you what the dream is. If you're the real deal, you should be able to figure out what the dream is and then interpret it for me. And they all cry foul, and then he gets mad, because megalomaniacs do that. And so he's getting mad at all these seers and magicians and all that, and he's saying to them, you're lying to me. If you're real, then you should be able to figure this out, and if you can't figure this out in short order, off with your head. I'm going to kill all of you because you're all fakes. Well, so the guards started to head toward Daniel, who was counted in one of these groups. And Daniel, under the knife, literally says, give me an audience with the king. And he goes to the king and says to Nebuchadnezzar, just give me some time and space to pray about this, all right? And for some crazy reason, even though all the other seers together asked the very same thing for time and understanding and all that, and they didn't get that wish granted, Daniel somehow did. And so for Jewish people already, that's already a victory. Because they're like, okay, everybody else it didn't work out so good for, but our guy, somehow he got through to the king, and God softened Nebuchadnezzar's heart. And so over time, not much time, Daniel is praying, calls his buddies, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to pray as well, and the dream is revealed to him. And he praises God for that, and then he goes back to Nebuchadnezzar and says, here's your dream. You have this dream of this really weird statue. And the head is of gold, and the breastplate is of silver, and sort of the torso, lower torso is bronze, and the legs are iron, and the feet are some kind of a weird mixture of clay and iron together. And then in your dream, this crazy rock boulder that's not cut from human hands just sort of comes out of the sky and knocks the whole thing flat because the feet can't support the whole thing. And Nebuchadnezzar's like, I can't believe you got it. To every detail, you nailed it. What does it mean? And Daniel went on to express that every part of that statue, from gold, the finest metal, to decreasing in value levels of import, all the way down to the feet, they all represented different kingdoms, different regimes that were going to come over time. And that eventually God would wipe this whole thing out. That each kingdom would get worse and worse, every oppressor worse and worse, and we know that the more you go against the Spirit of God, more against the Spirit of life, eventually that catches up And he's saying that's going to catch up and it's going to wipe out. And so that's the story that we're looking at today. And so I want to talk about a few movements with that. First of all, Nebuchadnezzar, the megalomaniac. So as I read about Nebuchadnezzar, I was deeply aware of my own human tendency to get it wrong and to be filled with myself. And even coming out here, I've told the story many times in our membership classes, but I had an ego the size of Texas when I moved out here 20 years ago. We'd turned around a church in Illinois. I thought I knew all that I needed to know about how to be successful in ministry and all. I just needed to bring my bag of tricks out here and wham bam, it's going to get done. And that just didn't happen. And it was a crushing blow for me. But I'm very aware that, while my desire might have been right and my goals, even if mixed, were still for how we could be a part of this church coming back to life after a very difficult 2 seasons, I recognize that my humanity certainly, over every year I've been here, has gotten in the way of my leadership. And so I want to do something that Nebuchadnezzar never would have done, which is, even on a day like today, which you're celebrating me in the ministry, I want to say I'm sorry. I want to say I'm sorry that where my humanity, where my brokenness has caused you pain, either as an organization or to a person. I'm genuinely sorry. And if we need to talk that out so that I am under greater understanding about what that meant so I can grow and learn, let's do that. But truly, I'm sorry if me got in the way of we together, because I know it did on occasion, and I don't feel good about that. And part of that reminds me again of just this incredible church that I came into. I can't help but be in a meeting like this, a gathering like this, and be aware of who's not here. And there were many saints who I've ushered in to their next phase of life that will forever remain rock stars in my head and my heart. Because these people, the average age was 70 when I came. Newer, younger people, when they came to the church, they would report back to me that when they would come to worship, they called it the sea of gray, because that's about all that was here. And I just want you to just think for a moment how incredible. I mean, this is a work of God. This isn't just about me. It's just my part, and it's really us, and it's really God working in the whole thing. Just think about how incredible it is that people at a time in their life when generally that's not a time when they're usually up for change. And a congregation, average age of 70, brought in a 29-year-old. And they were told, give the guy as much room as he wants to change, and they did it. They didn't always like it, but they did it. And some of you are still here, which is incredible. I mean, just incredible. I'm looking at Lorraine and Darlene here, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're still here, and you can't either. It's really, really amazing. But I'm just so grateful for it. And so this whole Nebuchadnezzar thing, just thinking about that, made me want to ask the questions and encourage all of us to always ask that question of our own humanity and what's really behind what we're doing, and what are the motives in our decisions, and what's the why behind all of the what and how that we do. Because I think the more we're in touch with that, probably the healthier we're going to be and the healthier decisions we're going to make. And that kind of leads me to the statue, and I ask a question: is it fixed or is it flexible? Because at this time in history, Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold. So he was looked at as the one on top, after which many lesser kingdoms were going to come. And I got to wonder, from other stories in the Bible, one about a guy named Hezekiah in particular, that I wonder if if when we hear words like he did about things are going to go south and south and south, I wonder if that's really an opportunity for us to ask the question, does it need to? I came into a church as the leader here after two really hard seasons of life. One in the 80s and then another in the 90s. That's why the only people left were the saints, the foundation blocks, literally the people who built these walls and had drives to put these walls up. They're the ones who stuck it out. And that reminds me of systems that we go through. Churches don't get to a place of, if you look at church world stuff and organizational development stuff, we are deep in the death slope on the bell curve. And the idea is you want to stay on the growth side of this thing and keep figuring out how to keep going to avoid getting down, because it's like a roller coaster. It's very, very hard to stop. It's a freight train. It's a cruise ship that once it starts down that slope, it is Herculean to stop that thing. And the beauty is that we stopped that thing. Together, we stopped that thing with my clunky, egocentric, megalomaniac self and you as being patient, giving me an umbrella of grace. We stopped it. And that's a beautiful thing. But as we go forward, it's like it hasn't ever stopped. And kind of like Disneyland, where we'll always keep moving forward. We're never going to be finished at CrossWalk. We're always going to figure out ways to be crosswalkier. What does that even look like? And the reality is we live in unprecedented times. We are living right now in one of these massive, every 500-year shifts in theology and church life. And in this particular movement, we're seeing, we know the stats that a record number of people are leaving not just the church, but faith in the United States. And that means that we need to think differently all the time about what's coming. And so it's an opportunity for us to always ask ourselves, well, what is the system, not just in our congregation, but as a country, as a culture, that we find ourselves in, so that we don't have to settle for a fixed outcome of it's all going to crash and burn. But there are things that we can do now in the way we're thinking about things to help ensure that it doesn't have to end in agony and death. And we're evidence that it doesn't have to be that way. So for a church, and for me as a pastor, that's kind of where I'm thinking and what I've learned so far in part. And I wonder on your part, because this isn't just a teaching about me, it's a teaching about we, is what systems do you find yourself in? And where are those systems taking you? And do you realize you have an option to change that system so that the bad outcome doesn't have to be the only outcome? So something to think about on that. And then we get to Daniel, MDR. MDR is that's a title for a degree or an abbreviation for what my son is getting. He's getting his master's in dispute resolution. So one day he will be Noah, MDR. And what that has to do with, just like it sounds, going into situations that are tense and where there is no peace, and bringing back harmony. And his big dream, which we're super proud of, is that he'd really love to work in cross-cultural settings and help bridge divides between cultures, between religious groups, that kind of thing. That's where his heart beats. He's a peacemaker. We didn't know it, but we named him well, because Noah literally means comfort. And so here he is wanting to do that. Well, Daniel did that in this story. All the other seers, magicians, spiritual people, they were already running for the hills because they knew that somebody was after them to kill them. But Daniel, he recognized there was a terrible injustice at play here. He recognized that if he didn't speak up, if he didn't use his voice to take care of and look after those who were under great threat, then a great injustice was going to happen. And so he made an incredibly courageous move to go to the source of power itself and say, this cannot happen, at least by time, so this cannot happen. In a sense, he was a social justice champion early on. because he recognized there were people that literally didn't have a voice anymore and were about to lose their heads. And he realized that just can't happen, and he wasn't going to stand for it. And so with great courage, he chose to go straight to the king and say, this cannot be this way anymore. You know, over my life, because I grew up in a moderate Christian home, meaning not super conservative, and because I had incredibly strong women in my family. My mom was a music minister in her life, but much more than that. She did significant work locally, regionally, nationally on women's ministry for our denomination. Was just a rock star on that stuff. And both of my sisters, just rock stars. My sister in broadcasting, and then she had a short stint as being a pastor in a church for just the contemporary stuff that was going on, and is still involved in women's ministry. My sister Ann, she's a pastor in upstate New York. And so just because I had these amazing women around me, and it never dawned on me that women should keep silent in the church because I'd never seen that or bought it. Even from the early days, I was always on the side of at least that in my church context, because I knew that there just had to be a different way of understanding that, even though we know that today that's still in question, which is just crazy. And then as I've learned and understood different things, and as I've grown in my faith, I've tried to give my voice to other people groups that don't have a voice. And as a Dutch white guy, I know that in many respects in the world, and at least in the Western world, I represent power. And the reality is, I've come to believe that if those of us who represent power and hold power don't speak up for those who do not have power, the powerless will continue to lose, and injustice will continue to be served. And so even though it has caused problems for CrossWalk in the past, earlier days it was gender. There were people who left the church because of my position on gender equality. That's going back 15, 18 years. But they walked in anger because I believed that women had an equal right to every level of leadership at CrossWalk. And more recently with LGBTQ stuff and comments about racism and immigration and all these things, I know it has pushed us because most of us look like me. And we need to be pushed on that because there is injustice. And Daniel did that in this story that we have. And this poking the bear thing, I think we can be smarter about it. I've certainly learned a lot over the years about stupid ways to do it and smarter ways to do it, and I hope to get wiser with time. But we live in a culture where there's great division. And if the people that are following Jesus can't be the ones to stand up and say, hey, how about shalom? How can we resolve this in ways that make sense and promote peace? Well, who's going to do it? And so we'll keep poking bears. And that leads me to a question beyond the church and beyond me for you, is what are those hot issues that just drive you nuts in culture? What are they? I mean, they're almost predictable if we just think about what ticks off people in the culture. My question is what might you do to understand the situation more fully so that you might pull a Daniel maneuver and recognize what's at stake and use the power and the voice that you have to make a difference? That leads me to the final thing. Daniel, psychiatrist or psychologist. We have Erin in the back is a psych doctorate. She's a counselor, and I thought about her in that title when I was coming up with this for Daniel. Daniel became a dream interpreter, actually more than an interpreter. First of all, he became a dream manifester, recognizing what the dream is, and then he was on the side of dream realization. I got to tell you, this has become so increasingly clear the longer I've been here, that I am so grateful that the dream I had when I came here did not come true. It was a very small dream. You know what the dream was? Just that we'd have a big church. Now, part of that's real good because it means in one respect we're kind of reaching people, but it's real bad in another respect because a lot of that touches my ego. I'm an Enneagram number 3 after all, and I want to know that I'm successful. That means something to me. And so the way that the church world, and still does to a much degree, the way the church world understood what success looked like was just being a packed church, a large church. But what I've understood over time is that if that is the only measure, then we are taking a major step away from Jesus himself, who we're trying to emulate. Jesus never gave a rip about having a big church. He knew that really wasn't the answer. If that became a byproduct of other things, okay, but that was never the goal. And as I've learned the hard way over time, and a lot of us just self-checking, gut-checking, leaving my ego at the door, I've recognized and seen how much more beautiful a different dream is, that I think really is my deeper dream, really is our deeper dream. And that's a dream of what God might do with a campus, with a people who just wants to love their community and serve them well. We've told the story that didn't happen overnight. There are moments in time along the way that I'll never forget. I'll never forget when Dar found me over in the gym. I was taking care of something, and she had an issue. Not with me, but she had a problem to solve. The noon group for AA was bursting at the seams, and they needed space. And we didn't really want to put them in the gym because it was such a big cave and a pain for, set up and tear down and all that stuff. And so she asked me, she said, what do you think about the sanctuary? And so we both kind of bristled at the idea at first. Get that over there. Because it was the sanctuary, right? This, don't mess with this, it's holy, right? Don't mess with that. What if it gets dirty or something? And literally it was like 30 seconds. We both just had the same light bulb at the same time, where we're like, what are we talking about? Of course the sanctuary, of course. And that was one of the holy cows that got barbecued that day around here, that we decided, and it wasn't unilateral, it was just, we sort of just kind of eased into it. I mean, all the things that CrossWalk is now compared to what it was, we tripped into it. There was no master plan at the beginning. It's been this ongoing relationship with God, trying to understand the flow and who we're supposed to be and who's with us, and understanding all that going forward. But one of the things that began way back then was just simply saying yes to God. Just simply saying yes to God. When opportunities to serve the community in different ways came our way, we just began saying yes more and more and more and more. And now, what are we at, 44? 43 meetings a week happening here for people in recovery. I mean, that's incredible. Awesome. And the yeses just led to bigger things that we can all feel so proud about. What our food pantry, how that has continued to say yes. I mean, it started with Darlene's 100 years ago, I understand, or so I've said. But that was always in motion, always moving forward. And now in different ways with more people, it's just continued to grow and bless. And how beautiful that is. And what we've done in Kenya with the orphans, I mean, we keep track of these numbers, and our little church has provided collectively like over 1.5 million meals just in the last 10 years. I mean, it's remarkable when you think about that. You think about the lives that are touched. Literally over 1,000 people flow through our halls for healing in our walls. Why wouldn't we say yes to that? That's what God is all about. So as we continue to wonder how God might use us, we have to wonder, first of all, is our dream too small? Have we settled for a lesser dream as a church? And I don't think we have. I think we've allowed our dream to grow into more God's dream for what CrossWalk can be here in the community. And I pray that we will always be open to that, to be willing to continue to say yes, even if it makes us uncomfortable. Because if God is behind it and with us, what do we got to lose? And what do we have to gain? And then personally, I think this is a really cool thing that, I don't know, just kind of stuck with me about Daniel. In our lives, I'm wondering a couple things. First, just on the receiving end, if Daniel were with us and our psychiatrist for a moment, or psychologist, wondering, what's your dream? And are you dreaming way too small? The dream that I had when I came here fit the bill of church growth movement. It fit the bill of what the church even wanted at that time. But boy, was it a small dream. Boy, was it a small dream. And I'm wondering for you, have you been chasing after a very small dream? And I have a hunch that in our culture, in our Western culture, right now in America, that very small dream has an awful lot to do with building our own personal kingdoms for ourselves, primarily. And I just wonder if there's a bigger dream for you. And then I have a thing that this is also just kind of buzzing in my head a little bit, that really, if we are to fall in line with Daniel was kind of the folk hero for the Jews, then I wonder how we might be the dream awareness people in the world and the dream realizer people. Like, I wonder if we could come alongside somebody and get to know their lives a little bit and hear their dreams, and not in any kind of a judgmental way, but just recognize that there may be a deeper, more profound dream for a person's life than what they're articulating or what they're aware of now. And the beauty of it is you don't need any secret power to do that, because I believe that every human being's deepest dream is very related to one another. Because it has to do with love, it has to do with joy, it has to do with hope, and it's inclusive of everyone. Now, that is our deepest craving, that is our deepest dream, and the reason I'm so confident that that deeply resides in every human being is because I believe the Spirit of God is there, emanating this dream and wondering how this dream might come out with the gene pool that we are, and how beautiful that can be. And so I'm wondering if you will recognize your role as dream agents, that you're able to articulate people's deepest dreams because it is your own dream. It is the dream that is sown by God. And I wonder if you realize what a hopeful challenge and beautiful invitation this is by God, that we get to be the people to help people realize their deepest, most profound dreams, which are rooted deeply within them, with the hope that despite the circumstances people are in, like the oppressive situation the Jewish people found themselves in, this dream can come true because it does not require external circumstances to come true. We see this when calamity happens. I see this regularly at times of death and illness, where in a moment where there should be absolute agony and pain and suffering, and there's certainly some of that, there also is sometimes a deep, profound peace and love and even joy in the midst of great suffering. And I wonder if that is tapping into something deep and divine in us that you and I get to be a part of. So who knew that Daniel chapter 2 would speak so much to me as the leader here at CrossWalk. Leader, like it's me. This whole thing is we. The whole thing is we. This is a dance. I thank you for what today is, but it's a dance, and we're dancing together, and I'm a terrible dancer. Everybody knows that. And the reality is that we are where we are, and we are where we're going, not because of me, but because of we. Us each using our own respective gifts in the equation to figure out how this gift mix is going to come together to make the most good in the world. And so I thank you for your patience and your grace. Oh, your grace over my klutziness and clunkiness as a leader over so many years, and putting up with me and letting me breathe. You have no idea how many pastors, when I tell them the shenanigans I pulled around here, they're just like, I could never get away with that. And I'm thinking, yeah, you're probably right. I can't believe I'm still here. I mean, that's really true. And that's because of your grace and I think a deep trust that somehow, some way, God is with us through this thing and is still with us and through us. So may we continually to be aware. May we continue to be aware of our Nebuchadnezzar tendencies and hold them in check. That we would never, to use one quip I think I've heard from recovery, ego stands for edging God out. May we never be so full of ourselves that we edge God out, and always leave room for that and be humble in that regard. May we recognize that statue prophecy of kingdoms and cycles and systems and coming to an end, I don't think it's necessarily fixed. I think we have some flexibility, and as long as we're in the mode of growing and changing at all times, because that is what life is, then I think the outcome is going to be good. And may we be people who raise our voice for those who need it the most, who don't have a voice and need our voice of power and strength to come alongside to give them justice. And may we, at the same time, be the people of the dream, be the ones who call people to a deeper dream and help them realize it as we together follow in the footsteps of Jesus Christ, our leader. Thank you for 20 years. Let's see how far this puppy can go. Let's pray together. God, thank you for, wow, just thank you. Thank you. Thank you for more things than I can articulate. It'll take too long. We don't have enough time to talk about all the things we could be thankful for. So just thank you, God. Thank you for the past. Thank you for the past long before me, for the faithful people who started this whole thing back in 1860 and who weathered storm after storm, a depression, world wars, Vietnam, Korea, the Great Recession of late. Thank you, God. Thank you for these people. Thank you for the collective we who've spanned 160 years. Thank you for the privilege of getting to be here, getting to be with these people. And may your grace and your beauty just continue to flow. Thank you for my wife, who has been so faithful and loves me deeply even though, and has provided an incredible family life for me and us. Thank you for her. And thank you for the key leaders who've helped make this place. And may we all step into the leadership circle and just see what you can do when we're all in. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.